Welcome to Poker News. I'm Tiffany Michelle, here to guide you through the only poker terminology that you'll need in order to sit down in a poker game and not look like a total newbie. Instead of going through the terms alphabetically, I've grouped them into categories which will correlate with how the game of poker is actually played, so that by the end of this video, not only will you be a dictionary of poker terms, but you'll have a good sense of how a hand of poker would unfold if you sat down at the tables today. Let's establish a couple basic terms you have to know, which will help the rest of this terminology guide make total sense. The pot or a pot refers to both the sum of money that all players have wagered during a single hand of poker, and it can mean the physical location at the center of the table where the accumulated chips are placed by the dealer. Example, I won the pot. Push your chips into the pot. Or there's 2,500 in the pot. Hand. We use this term in two ways. A player's hand refers to the two face-down cards they're dealt. Example, I had a great hand, or I folded my hand. But hand could also refer to a round of poker, which is the time from when the dealer shuffles and deals cards to all the players to when the player ultimately wins the pot, thus concluding that hand of poker. After a player's awarded the pot, the dealer shuffles all the cards back into the deck and deals a new round of cards, thus a new hand begins. Examples, there were 4 players in the hand. I was involved in a tricky hand, or I won the hand, which hopefully you get to say a lot. Board refers to the face-up cards that the dealer places in the center of the table, also known as community cards. As a player, you won't use that term very much. This is just a way of explaining that the cards on the board are used by all players at the table in an attempt to make the best hand by combining their 2 face-down cards with the 5 face-up community cards on the board. Examples for this term, there was a flush on the board. The board paired. It was a scary board. Okay, now you know the essential terms for playing poker, so let's talk through ones that directly relate to the phases and betting rounds of the game. In poker, players not only play with the 2 face-down cards that they're dealt, but they're aiming to match these 2 cards with what will be 5 face-up cards. The 5 cards come in sections. The dealer will place 3 face-up cards called the flop, a single 4th card called the turn, and a final 5th card called the river. Having this overview will help you understand these next terms. Preflop is the first betting round and phase of the game that occurs before the dealer places any face-up community cards on the board. Example, I folded my hand pre-flop, or the pre-flop action was a bet and a call. The term flop not only refers to the 3 face-up cards placed on the board, but can also refer to the round of betting and action that occurs after these cards have appeared. Example, I made a pair on the flop. I flopped a monster hand. He bet out on the flop. No surprise that the term post-flop refers to the phase of betting and action that takes place after the first 3 cards have been placed on the board. You can often use the terms flop and post-flop similarly. Example, he raised me on the flop, or he raised me post-flop. An important difference is that flop is the term to directly refer to the first 3 cards on the board, while post-flop refers to the action that takes place after these cards are shown. After the 3-card flop comes the 4th community card called the turn. Example, the turn brought a jack, or I raised on the turn. The river is the 5th and final community card that's placed on the board. One might say I pushed all in on the river, or my opponent beat me on the river. This leads me to the term rivered, which means that you had the best hand up until the 5th community card was shown, but an opponent made a better hand than you on account of the river card. When we talk about action at the poker table, it can mean 2 things. It could mean having a lot of players and a lot of activity in a hand. For example, in a 9-hand poker game, if every single player at the table decided to enter the pot and play their hand, that would be a lot of action compared to only 2 opponents vying for the pot. But most of the time when we use the term action, it's in reference to a single player's decision or turn to take action. A dealer might say, the action's on you. Available actions in poker are to bet, call, raise, check, fold, re-raise, or go all in. I know I went through that fast, so let's break down these action terms now. All in is the act of wagering or putting all of one's chips into the pot. If you were to lose when all in, you'd be eliminated on account of having no chips left. If you were to win an all in, well, good for you. You will have been said to have doubled up, obviously meaning to double the size of your chip stack after winning an all in. When a player bets, it means to make the first wager in the current round of betting. If you match or call a pre-existing bet from another player, we wouldn't refer to this as a bet since that wasn't the first chips put into the pot. We'd refer to this as a call. The term call meaning to match the existing wager on the current round of betting. When facing a bet from another player, if you don't want to just call or match the bet, you might want to raise, which means increase the amount of the bet or put more chips into the pot than required. A re-raise means to increase the bet amount after there has already been one raise. You might not get the opportunity to do this next one very often in poker, but a check means you don't want to make any bet or put any chips into the pot at that moment. Consider it a temporary pass. This is only an option if no bet has yet been made before you. Example, if someone bets 25 chips, you don't have the option to check. You must always pay the bet amount wagered by the most recent player to act if you want to continue in the hand. However, if a player checks and the next player to act also checks, and so forth, the action could potentially be checked around, thus completing that round of betting. Remember, you can only check if you aren't facing any bet before you, and a check is only an option in the flop, turn, and river betting stages of the game, because pre-flop, at the start of the hand, when you're first dealt your cards, you'd be required to call the big blind if you wanted to play. And the final term you need to know when it comes to the options or actions available to you when it's your turn to act at the poker table is fold. You probably know this one, but a fold means to discard your 2 cards and forfeit your participation in the current hand or pot. Don't worry, you'll have another chance to play, but once you fold your hand, you will have to wait until that round of the game is over, someone has won the pot, and the dealer shuffles the deck and deals all players 2 new cards. And the game starts again. Now you know the basic terms, phases of a poker game, and the player action terminology, so let's talk through game terms that you're guaranteed to hear when sitting down at a poker table. In every poker game, a small plastic dealer button on the table is used to indicate where the action begins and which player is first to act. You might hear the phrases, "I was on the button," in order to indicate which position a player was acting from in a given hand, or the dealer might say, "Button's right," to indicate that they have moved the button into the next position at the completion of the hand. The blinds collectively refer to the small blind and big blind. These are forced bets from the 2 players to the immediate left of the dealer button. These mandatory bets help get the pot started and give players something to play for. Small blind specifically refers to the player to the immediate left of the dealer button who is required to place a mandatory blind bet of a predetermined amount. The big blind is a player to the small blind's immediate left or 2 seats to the left of the dealer button who is required to place a mandatory blind bet of a predetermined amount before the hand begins, and it will always be double the amount of the small blind. Ante is somewhat similar to a blind in the sense that it's a mandatory bet that all players are required to make before a hand is dealt. While blinds happen every single hand in poker, whether you're playing a tournament or cash game, an ante or the antes usually occurs in the later stages of a poker tournament, with the goal being to increase the pot size and encourage more action among the players now that there's extra money in the pot to be won. Orbit is a common measure of the length of play in poker. If the dealer button moves clockwise around the table at the end of each hand, indicating where the action begins, an orbit is when the dealer button has made its way all the way around the entire table, essentially completing one entire cycle of the game. In a 9-handed game, an orbit would be 9 hands of play. Position refers to where a player is seated at the poker table in relation to the dealer button, and subsequently in relation to the action. We break this down into 3 terms. Early position roughly means the players who are first to act in a hand. Late position refers to the players who are last to have the chance to act in a hand. And middle position or mid position, of course, would be the players in between the 2. Early position for a full table game is the first 2 or 3 seats or players to act in a hand. Pre-flop, this would be the 2 to 3 players to the left of the big blind, but after the flop, the blinds are first to act and would be considered in early position. When you begin to learn about poker strategy, you'll discover that it's harder and less advantageous to play a hand from early position because you have the least amount of information in regards to what your opponents acting behind you will do. That brings us to late position, which is a much more preferable position to play from in poker because you get to see if the players who acted ahead of you called, folded, bet, re-raised, etc. You have more information and usually make better decisions on whether you want to commit your chips to the pot when you're playing a hand in late position. Under the gun is the term to indicate the player or position to the immediate left of the big blind. This player is the very first one to act in the round and therefore has the least amount of information as to what their opponents will do. As the term under the gun indicates, decision making is very difficult when sitting in this position. I'm sure your brain is very full from all of that poker terminology, but don't worry, it all starts to make sense when you sit down and play. And after watching this guide, you're well on your way to doing so. If you're hungry for more or a little confused and you want to put all of this into applicable context, check out our other how-to and how not to poker tutorial videos. We've got tons of resources here on PokerNews to help you on your way. I'm Tiffany Michelle, saying good luck at the tables, and I hope to see you there.
Well, you made it to the end of the video. If you want to subscribe, click up here. Want to keep watching our stuff? Click right over here.